My name is Wendy Murphy. I just published a book called And Justice for Some. I'm at this conference because it's an important place to be if you care about justice, and I do. I mean, justice is a core concept around which society is organized. It matters whether it's fair. It matters whether the truth is told. And, you know, in my experience, I've been doing this work for 20 years in all kinds of courtrooms, family court, criminal court, civil court. There's nothing close to the truth coming out, and there's nothing close to justice happening, especially when it comes to women and children victims of violence. So I'm here, and my book, I hope, as an expose of some of the systemic problems women and children face, is designed to start change. You know, let's talk about it. Let's get the problems out there. Let's brainstorm. Let's work together. Let's mobilize politically, and stop just being obedient. You know, I'm just sick of women, especially, being obedient to the bullies, whether it's the bully judge, the bully lawyers. We've been too nice for too long. There are a zillion different things we can be doing, all perfectly appropriate, respectful within the bounds of the law. In each of my chapters in my book, I outline some of the things you can do. You don't have to be a lawyer. You don't have to be especially trained. You just have to be someone who cares. So in my book, the way I've broken it down is each chapter is a dirty trick. And I explain what it is, how it works. I give examples, some high-profile cases that taught all of us how crazy the systems are, the legal systems. And at the end I say, and here's what we can do about it. Here's what you can do about it. So, you know, this conference, books like mine, and the work of so many other wonderful advocates, it's just a drop in the bucket of the work we really need to do. So many times we spend our energy saying, let's do a judicial training, or let's have a meeting about having a meeting about having a meeting about what we might want to do in terms of educating the judges, or you know, some other god-awfully slow approach to repair. Children are in danger in our court system. They're in danger in the real world. They're in danger in their own homes. Women are suffering the most inhumane kinds of acts of violence behind closed doors, with impunity, and there's nothing happening. No justice. Is it any wonder women stop reporting? And you know, if you ask most women, would you call the police if you were beaten or raped or one of your children was abused? Would you even call the police? A lot of women say, no, why bother? No one's going to come. If they do come, they're not going to believe me. If they do believe me, they're not going to press charges. If they do press charges, I'm going to get beaten up during the court process. And even if I manage to have a successful result at the end of the day, there's not going to be any punishment for the bad guy, so it won't have been worth it. And if I report it in a family court proceeding, if I have the audacity to suggest that my children have been abused or I've been battered, I get punished by that court system too. Judges basically say, you know, just be a nice woman, be a good mother, be quiet, get along. Can't you find a way to resolve this? You know, what kind of legal system says to women who are being violated, children who are being victimized, what kind of legal system says to them, well, when you get to family court, you have to find a way to give a little? No, actually, you shouldn't have to give a little, right? Child gets raped, father should lose custody, period. There's no negotiation to be had. There should never be a discussion about negotiation. You rape your child, you lose your parental rights. It's a privilege to be a parent. And if you're a parent who needs help, that's fine. Negotiation is fine. If you're a parent with trouble, even addiction, I mean, whatever your issues are, absolutely work it out, find a way. Parents should be civilized to one another. You rape a child, no room for civility. Nuh-uh, you lost my respect. You're out of there. And that's what we're not doing. In fact, we're doing the opposite. Too often, the sexually abusive father wins custody of the child because the system is only too happy to indulge the defense that the mother made the kid lie, something else is going on here, the mother has an agenda. You know, how dare this child make such scandalous suggestions about me, and making it so contentious and adversarial that, you know, judges really, I think, are in a position of saying, well, do I strip this man of his parental rights when he's saying it didn't happen The child is saying it did. The mother is agreeing with the child and trying to help the child, and the father's saying that's a conspiracy. Father wins. You know, what kind of system does that? What kind of system does that? And, you know, the final thing I'll say about the family court system, and I don't practice in family court a lot, and I have to be honest about that. And the reason I don't practice in family court is I would be in jail. I did do some family court work early in my practice, and I felt like I was in the twilight zone. No one seems to care about the law. It is applied frivolously and to the harm of children and women for the most part. Sometimes guys suffer too, and it's important to be honest about that. Guys do get the raw end of the deal sometimes because there's a kind of gender bias that kicks in that says, you know, a man isn't the better parent, the woman is, and that's not good for guys. But when abuse is part of the picture, we're not getting it right. And one of the most fundamental things I hear from my clients who have issues in family court and criminal court, and they're just, all they want is safety. I mean, that's not too much to ask for from your legal system. And what they tell me is that their child is not being believed. When it's about abuse of the child, we have to reform the system overnight and literally make sure it's the law in every state in this country that if a child wants to testify, I don't care how old they are, as long as they understand the difference between a truth and a lie, they should be allowed to testify. When a child wants to testify and has something to say about having suffered violence in the home, the child should be allowed to testify. We gag children's voices in family court. We gag them a lot in criminal court too, which I suppose explains why we're really bad at preventing, punishing, and deterring targeted violence against children. I'll say it again, I don't work in the family court system because to walk into a courtroom, to see pictures of, you know, symbols of justice all over the place, to believe that this is where fairness is supposed to kick in, and to watch time and time again grave injustice happening, where a man who has brutalized his child, beaten his wife, is now the prize winner, walking out of the courthouse with children in his sole care and custody, to be rewarded for brutality. That's what our legal system is doing in too many cases. Not every case. This is not about all men are bad, all judges are unfair, but it is happening in such disproportionate numbers. It is an epidemic, and it's not just destroying families, it's destroying real human beings. You know, this conference is a really important part of the solution. This conference and the work of the folks who speak here every year is helping to change the world. I think we're building a revolution. And it all starts with just getting together, political mobilization, talking to one another, putting the time in and saying, you know, we can change the world. We've been playing defense for too long. Let's start playing offense. No longer the victim, you know, let's put our swords up and get back to fighting the good fight, because it matters and it's worth it. I mean, you know, when we think about Mother Bear and what kind of reaction I would have if anyone ever hurt my kids, I say, I would be in jail, because there would be no limit to my reaction. The way I feel right now, if someone hurt my child, I would be violent, rageful. I felt so bad though, you know. Imagine, so you forgot to change the battery, you lose your whole job.
Yeah. Yes, okay, we're relevant.
But what was I saying? I was going to finish up.
We're not heroes, we're victors.
Oh yeah, you know, it's so important. Just because you've been victimized and your child has been victimized and you know the system is not going to embrace you and support you and protect you, it doesn't mean you can't rise up. And in fact, to the contrary, what we need is education. We need to communicate better. The internet is a great way to do it. If we can talk to each other, teach each other the tricks of the trade, you know, get our thick skin on and press ahead and play offense instead of defense, I think we can really make a difference. We're not doing it yet, but the bubbles are rising, and I love it. All right, judicial reform.
She's good. She's saying judicial reform. Okay. Family court.
Yeah. There are so many layers to the problem. It's not one. There's so many layers to the problem. It's not one person or one profession's responsibility. Some part of the problem goes with lawyers. Some part of the blame goes to the judges. And reform is not as easy when the problem is the judiciary, because they make the, well, no, they don't make the laws. Ugh, blah, blah. You're going to have to redo this. I'll just start with judges. One of the chief complaints I hear, and again, this goes for the family court system, the civil court system, the criminal court system, is that judges, when they do outrageous things, when they look like they're corrupt or engaging in the most barbaric of decision-making practices, people are angry, they want somewhere to go, and there's nowhere to go. Appeals are almost never successful, especially in family court where judges have huge discretion. So the question is, what can we do to make judges feel more accountable? If they were just doing their jobs fairly, we wouldn't even be talking about this. And for a long time, there wasn't as much of a need for judicial accountability. I think things have gotten so bad, we really do have to start to talk about that. We want an independent judiciary. The fact that that branch of government is independent is important to a free democracy. But when judges are acting outside the realm of reasonable, outside the realm of judicial propriety, and frankly, unconstitutionally, you have to have somewhere to go. So there are a couple of ideas out there, and I'm sure there are plenty more, but these are the ones I write about in my book. First of all, we need some kind of inspector general's office in the legislative branch that can provide simply a place where the regular people can go to say, here's my complaint. I want someone to have a record that this is what happened to my case. This is what this judge did in my case. That's my phone. I had it on vibrate.
Can I get it?
No. So one thing we can do with an office created through the legislative branch, something like an inspector general's office, is simply have a place for people to go. Registering the problem is a really important first step. You can't even ask for change until you have data that shows the nature of the problem. So I think it's irresponsible, frankly, not to have something that a person can do when they want to complain about their government. And the judge is the government. And they don't know that. They don't think they're the government because they're a different kind of government than police and prosecutors and so forth. But they are the government. And in a legitimate democracy, the people have to have a place they can go to register their complaint about the government. We don't have a place. Every state should have something. And one of the good models out there is called the Alaska Office of Victims' Rights. Now, it's slightly different than what I'm suggesting here, but the point is that they have a legislatively created building, a place where people can go and fill out a form and say, this is how I was treated in the legal system. The police treated me like this, the prosecutor treated me like this, the defense attorney was horrible to me, the defense investigator did such and such to me, the probation officer, everybody gets a place for review. That doesn't mean that whatever the person says, all those people go to jail or, nothing happens, but at least they're registering information. Why can't we do that for the family court? Why can't people who are aggrieved by the family court process go somewhere, fill out a form, and have someone in a position of authority be gathering the information? At least let's be gathering the information. Another option is already available but almost never used. It's in Massachusetts, it's called, where I practice, it's called the Commission on Judicial Conduct. And in a nutshell, it's the place where the ethical behavior of judges is monitored to some extent. Now, it's not easy to find out about these places because they're not advertised. Judges aren't saying, oh, I hope you'll check out the website where our unethical behavior can be complained about. But it's available in every state. You can file anonymously. You can file online. You can go in physically if you want to. And the problem is the standards are very high. So we could start to talk about shifting the standards a little bit. Instead of making judges only face ethical punishment if they engage in what's called misconduct, which usually means something very, very serious, why not something a little bit broader that might encompass a pattern of bad behavior with regard to certain classes of people, right? So first of all, we need to change the standard, but let's also teach each other how to file these forms. Where are they? And are they gathering the information that we're giving them? And if so, what can we expect of them once this information is there? Because in a lot of cases, the complaints are going to be rejected. The commissions on judicial conduct will say, we understand your frustration, but a judge has discretion to do that, and I know you don't like the decision, but that's not our business. One of the things I'd like to see, though, is if a particular judge has a habit of making that particular decision only when the person is female, alleging child sex abuse on behalf of her child, and in a divorce proceeding, if that's the pattern for a judge, somebody should be measuring that data. And so, yes, they might say, well, you, person number one, you don't have a complaint that rises to the level of misconduct. But now that we have 300 cases, that's misconduct. Well, unless we start filing these things, we're never going to get those 300 cases. And there are judges out there with such profound biases that they have, in my opinion, engaged in systematic misconduct. But it's not being reported because the people who experience this kind of unfairness are being told, well, that's not misconduct. So we have a problem there. We have two ships passing in the night on what's being measured, what we're trying to do. We need to be clear about that. That's both, I think, something we can do through regulation and education. And my favorite form of judicial oversight, which goes for all judges everywhere, is simply public outcry. There's nothing better. Just like we understand that in a free democracy we should be protesting when, a law is passed that we don't like, or the court is making a decision, to, make all people wear seat belts, and civil libertarians don't like it, and, we're allowed to protest lawmaking bodies. We're allowed to protest when we don't like what our government is doing, no matter what branch of government is doing it. Well, that goes for judges too, including in family court cases. So, for example, in my book I write about a very infamous judge named Edward Cashman from Vermont, who gave a 60-day prison sentence to a man named Mark Hewlett, a 40-something-year-old man who repeatedly raped a little girl, seven-year-old girl, over the course of 4 years. Over and over and over again on a nearly weekly basis. Sometimes he brought his buddy along. This poor child suffered immeasurably. And here's a judge required, as a constitutional matter, to give a punishment that is proportionate to the crime. And he has a duty to make sure that he does that which is fair. Well, 60 days, not even close. How can you redress that? What can you do when a judge gives out a woefully inadequate sentence? If you complain about it, someone's going to say, well, it was within the range, because the range says, up to 20 years or whatever the punishment is, up to so many years. 60 days is within the up to part of that, but it's unconscionably low. So this is what people did. They said, we can't appeal a bad sentence. Let's just protest. And that's what people did. And it was beautiful. Between standing at the courthouse with signs, sending letters, literally marching in the streets, going on television, screaming and yelling, writing to local newspapers, op-eds. And this was not a partisan issue. People on both sides of the aisle said, this is unacceptable. This is uncivilized. I don't want to live in a world where 60 days is the going rate for repeatedly raping a little girl. So the good news is that at the end of the day, this judge had to step down because it became clear that he did not believe that punishment was the right response. He wanted this guy to get treatment. He, talked about vengeance is bad for the soul and so forth. Obviously, this is a judge with a certain ideology, a certain philosophy, and he's entitled to that. That's fine. But you can't be a judge and act on a philosophy that's completely inconsistent with the point of the criminal justice system, the key feature of which is punishment. We are actually allowed to punish. Indeed, that is the point. This judge didn't really believe that that was the goal, so he was ultimately forced through these public protests to step down. And interestingly enough, I think this is the most silver of silver linings in stories like this, is that he was also forced through the public pressure to increase the sentence from 60 days to 4 years. Reasonable people still said that's not enough, and they're right. But here's the message. Never in the history of this country, ever, has a judge been forced through public outcry to increase a punishment. Never before in the history of this country has a judge been forced through public outcry to increase a criminal sentence. Think about that. What a message, right? Success. Scream, yell, throw things, protest, and look what you get. You get results. You get change. You get a judge who's shamed into doing the right thing, and then he steps down. Now, a lot of people said, that's not fair. We need judicial independence. That's not the way to hold judges accountable. That's barbaric. Well, I said, you know, think about the Gina 6 case. Think about lots of the death penalty cases. Women are criticized when they protest bad judicial decisions. They're told, be polite, it's not nice, judicial independence, aren't you a good American? Be quiet, go home and be quiet. Don't protest the poor judge, his job is hard. And yet, when people in the Gina 6 case, in almost all death penalty matters, the mobs at the gates. I mean, O.J. Simpson's case, mobs at the gates. Michael Jackson, mobs at all these mobs. When you're trying to help the bad guy, they're acceptable. That's protected speech. You know, the right to protest. Leave those people alone. They're doing their American duty. And what about judicial independence? So much for judicial independence in Michael Jackson's case and O.J.'s case. That judge in O.J. Simpson's case was deeply affected by the large gathering of protesters. No one complained about the insult to judicial independence. It's only when girls do it, when women do it, about the family court, then it's somehow, I don't know, tyranny, you know, un-American, bad, never good. So the good news is that because of this Judge Cashman case, not only did we learn that it's successful, but it was widely celebrated as an acceptable thing to do. And I think we have to break out of that mold of thinking that when a judge does a bad thing, we have no choice but to scream at our lawyer, go home and hit the pillow. Actually, no, we have citizenship rights that we need to latch on to and exercise really loudly. What's problematic in virtually all aspects of our legal system is that if you have a lot of money, you tend to get a better result because you can manipulate things more. You can make life hell for your opponent. If you exhaust through crazy litigation strategies, exhaust your opponent, whether it's your wife or you know, an opponent in a civil case, whatever, at some point they just give up, you know, please just let this go away. I'll give you anything. Fine, you can have the kids. Just leave me alone. I'm going to shoot myself. That is sometimes the story I hear. I hear women talking about, well, my husband brutally raped and attacked my children, but he so burned me out during the divorce proceedings that at some point when the judge is pressuring me to find a way to negotiate and settle, and I had no money left, I was about to become homeless, I was emotionally exhausted, I was losing time at work, I finally said, okay, to the deal. All right, he can visit with the children half time. You know, he can have visitation on weekends. And I can't believe I did this. I let a rapist have visitation with my children, his victims, because I couldn't stand being re-victimized during the legal process. I mean, come on. So the legal system, which is supposed to be doing justice, is now being used as leverage because it causes me pain to get my batterer, abuser, rapist husband a better deal? That's a sick way to run a legal system. And it happens all the time. And no state is immune. No state is immune. The lack of judicial accountability is a huge part of the story. Not all judges are bad. In fact, most judges are great. But even one bad apple can ruin a life. And isn't that enough of an argument that we should have some degree of accountability? Judges aren't just making rulings about, who gets to cut the hedges in a neighborhood where the lawns overlap. This is about human life, making a decision that allows a person who is violent and abusive to then have isolated access to their victim. Making a decision like that is making a decision to destroy a person forever. Judges with that much power have to have that much access to oversight and accountability. They have to believe that someone's watching because there's too much at stake. And the way the system works now, they don't believe that. They often make bad decisions because they know there's no oversight and accountability. You think? That's why they do it, because they can. Some people would argue, well, we can just do better character screening if we just did better screening of judges. But they always start off like nice guys and nice women. Oh, but they really did well in law school and they had a stellar career and, came from a nice family. That's not really predictive of whether you're ultimately going to have problems being fair, especially in a society that really does have huge problems with gender bias, biases against children. I mean, come on, children don't vote, they don't have any money. Mistreating them in the name of the law is easy. It's easy. They have no power. People forget that in this country we had laws to protect animals against abuse long before we had laws to protect children from abuse. Doesn't that tell us all we need to know about whether we think of children as people with individual rights worthy of respect and protection? We don't. We don't, and we're so far away from getting that right. Judges are supposed to be the protectors of the defenseless. Judges are supposed to rise above all our social prejudices. Judges are supposed to say, I even need to be aware of my own biases and rise above them. And judges aren't doing that. They're really not doing that. And if there were a magic wand we could wave over them, and even if we could just ask them, what would you do to make your colleagues who you think aren't getting it right do it better? What would you do? 9 times out of 10, I think what they would say is training. We need more training, training. And that's been the mantra for 30 years. Ever since we've been starting to talk about child abuse in the real world, mandatory reporting laws, started to become more aware of battering issues and sexual violence in our homes. Training has done nothing. Absolutely nothing to deal with the more important question, which is, to what extent does our court system recognize and honor the disparity in the parties' power when they walk into that courtroom? Now, it's not always money, but it's often money. A judge should know that when 2 people come in and one has a bucket of money, the other has none, you have to be extra careful, vigilant about not indulging this side just because they filed the most pleadings with the best legal citations, and. So some person over here is scribbling out their motion with a lipstick on a napkin, right? Maybe, no matter what the papers look like, the fair thing to do is over here, And judges, I think, they're not hardwired to think that way. They believe that's what they do, but they're not self-critical enough to know when they're not doing it. There is no accountability for that. There is no oversight. You can't provide that kind of check and balance for the system to say to these human beings who are deeply flawed, who are vested with huge power. You can't say to them, watch yourself, because they think they're fair. No one likes the concept of mob justice because it sounds like vigilante and so forth. It has this negative connotation. But when the system fails to mind itself, when there are no checks and balances, the natural development of rage becomes a kind of mob justice. I say in my book, I'm opposed to vigilantism. I really am. But that doesn't mean I don't understand what it means. And I say I don't support it, I don't promote it, but I sure see it. And I see it in large numbers, like never before, when a woman takes matters into her own hands and just, kills or shoots the guy who raped her kid. It's partly because she knows it's not worth it to call police, get the trial process going, and expect something from the justice system. It's the canary in the coal mine, okay, so we've started to take the law into our own hands. We're about to become, in large numbers, this kind of mob rule, right? And is anyone paying attention because you might want to try fixing the system first. This could be chaos. This could be painful. And when you lose that level of respect for the integrity of law, when people start saying, I no longer respect the rule of law itself, civility suffers. You know, we suffer at every level. When people start to believe that the justice system isn't fair, why would they even bother to obey any laws? That's where we are in this country. So you, the woman who's been battered and the child who's been abused, you're expected to obey the law, but no one else is. At some point, that becomes the basis for collapse. The rule of law is meaningless, and you can't get it back. Once the rule of law takes a hit, you can't get it back.